Number 59. Last Sabbath morning I read Cicero's Dialogus de Amicitia, simple Latin iti, and very short, 27 sections only. It seemed like enjoying the company of an old friend. It is now just 47 years since I first read it, at Exeter. I marvel at Montaigne for not thinking highly of it, but find some little motive in the fact that he had written a tract upon the subject himself, which may be found in his first volume, page 215, London, 1811, and by which can no more be compared to the Dialogus than to use George Coleman's expression, a mummy to a Hyperion. The Dialogus de Amicitia of the Sabbath morning. A. My reverend Orthodox brother, not having in my system one pulse of sympathy for disorganization and liberty parties, I reverence the Holy Sabbath as much as you do yourself, and to prevent the Dialogus from hurting me, I read one sermon before and another immediately after. Jeremy Taylor's Apples of Sodom and Fletcher's Sur la Correction Fraternelle. Such sermons as in the concoction would perhaps be very likely to burst your mental boiler, and which would not suit the appetites of many modern congregations, who have ruined their powers of inwardly digesting such strong meat by dieting upon theological precondices, faiths, avec de sucre, and you was not at meeting then. Right then, my dear brother, I am deaf as a haddock, though Sir Thomas Browne has annihilated this favorite standard of comparison by assuring us that a haddock has good ears as any other fish in the sea. Mine, however, are quite unscriptural. Ears not to hear. My ear is all in my eye. Roscius boasted of his power to convey his meaning by mute gesticulation. Our modern clergy have so little of this gift that with my impracticable ears it is all dumb show for me. Now and then, when the wind is fair, I catch a word or two, and no cross readings were ever more grotesque and comical than my cross hearings. I am convinced that I do not always have the worst of it, when in reply to an old lady who once asked me how I liked the preacher, I told her I heard not a syllable. What a mercy, she exclaimed, but consider the example. True, there is something in that. Try the experiment. Stop the Matus editorius with beeswax and try it, for half a dozen Sabbaths, even with the knowledge that you can remove the impediment at will, which I cannot. After I had finished the Dialogus, I found myself successfully engaged in the process of mental exhumation. Up they came, one after another, the playmates of my childhood, with their Titadums and Merry Andrews, the companions of my boyhood, with their tops, kites, and marbles, the friends and associates of my youth, with their skates, bats, and fowling pieces. It is really quite pleasant to gather a party upon such short notice, and with so little effort, and without the trouble of providing wine and sweetmeats. Upon the very threshold of manhood, how they scatter and disperse. There is a passage of the Dialogus, the 10th section, which is so true to life at the present hour that one can scarcely realize it was written before the birth of Christ. Ida Scipio quidem nihil difficilius esse dicabat quam amicitium usque ad extremum vita permanere non vel ut non edem expederet ut rec inceder sap vel ut de republica non edem senaterant mutare etiam mores hominum sape dicabat alias eversis rebes alias atat ingravescent atac eram brarum exemplum ex similitudine capiabat inquentis atatis quod summe purorum moris sapa una cum platexta penerentur sin autem ad adolescentiam prodexiscent derime tamem interdum contentiam vel uxorea conditiones vel commode elacugus quod edem edipisce uterc non posset quod seque longes in iniquitia provecte essent tamem sape labefactare se in honoris contentionum incidescent testem esse nullum iniquitiis quam in clarisque pecunia cupiditatem in optimus quibusque honoris certamen et gloria ex qua inimicitias maximus sape inter amicissimas extitessa. And the first, the Scipio is, I guess, a restoration phrase. He Scipio, okay. Lord Roster says that nothing was ever benefited by translation but a bishop. This, nevertheless, I believe, is a fair translation of the passage. He, Scipio, said that nothing was more difficult than for a friendship to continue at the very end of life, either because its continuance was found to be inexpedient for one of the parties, or on account of political difference. He remarked that men's humors were apt to be affected sometimes by adverse fortune, and at others by the heavy listlessness of age. He drew an example of these things from a similar condition in youth. The most vehement attachments among boys were commonly laid aside with the praetexta or at the age of maturity, or if continued beyond that period, they were occasionally interrupted by some contention about the state or condition of the wife, or the possessions or advantages of somebody, which the other party was unable to equal. Indeed, if some there were whose friendship was drawn along to a later period, it was very apt to be weakened if they became rivals in the path of fame. The greatest bane of friendship among the mass was the love of money, and among some of the better sort, the thirst for glory, by which the bitterest hatred had been generated between those who had been the greatest friends, unless it be orthodoxy. Well, real orthodoxy is correct believing, but orthodoxy tends to be the phrase for the reactionary restoration movement attempt, right? Nothing has been so variously defined as friendship. A man who stands by and sees another murdered in a duel is his friend. Mutual endorsers are friends. Partisans are the friends of the candidate. Those gentlemen who give their time and talents to eat and drink up some wealthy fool who will pass for an amphitryon and laugh at the fellow's simplicity behind his back are his friends. The patrons, the players, and buffoons and signors and signorinas are their friends. The vendors of Havana cigars and Bologna sausages inform their friends and patrons that they have recently received a fresh supply. Marat was the friend of the people. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were the friends of Job, and he told them rather uncivilly, I think, that they were miserable comforters. Matthew speaks of a friend of publicans and sinners. Monsieur Maigret, who, as Voltaire relates, the instant Charles XII was killed, exclaimed, Voilà la peace finie, arrons super. See, the play is over. Let us go to supper, was the king's friend. William I, like other kings, had many friends who, the moment he died, ran away and literally left the dead to bury the dead, of which a curious account may be found in the Harleian Miscellany, Volume 3, page 160, London, 1809. Friendship flourishes at Christmas and New Year's for everyone, we are told in the Book of Proverbs, is a friend to him that giveth gifts. There seems to be no end to this enumeration of friends. The name is legion, to say nothing of the whole society of friends. What then could Aristotle have meant when he exclaimed, as Diogenes Laertius says he did? Figure 5, see 20, section 21. My friends, there is no such thing as a friend. Menander is stated by Plutarch in his tract on brotherly love, chapter 3, to have proclaimed that man happy who had found even the shadow of a friend. It would be hard to describe the friend whom Aristotle and Menander had in mind. Cicero has employed 27 sections and given us an imperfect definition after all. Such friend comes not within any one of the categories I've named. Friends, in the common acceptation of that word, may be readily lost in one. The direction ascribed to Rochefoucault seems less revolting. When applied to such friends as these, to treat all one's friends as if one day they might be foes, and all one's foes as if one day they might be friends, this cold-blooded axiom is Rochefoucault's only by adoption. Aristotle in his Rhetoric, Book 2, Chapter 13, and Diogenes Laertius in his Life of Bias, Book 1, Section 7, describes something like this saying to him. Cicero, in his 16th section of the Dialogus de Amicitia, after referring to the opinion ita amera aportera ad se alquando esset asuras, and stating Scipio's abhorrence of the sentiment, expresses his belief that it never proceeded from so good and wise a man as Bias. Aulus Gellius, Liber 1, Cap, what does Cap stand for? 3, imputes to Chilon, chapter, probably, one of the 7 wise men of Greece, substantially the same sentiment. Love him as if you were one day to hate him, and hate him as if you were one day to love him. Poor Rochefoucault, who had sins enough to answer for, is as unjustly held to be author of this infernal sentiment as was Dr. Guillotin of the instrument that bears his ill-fated name, the guillotine. Boccaccio was in the right. There is a skeleton in every house. We have, all of us, our crosses to carry, and should strive to bear them as gracefully as comports with the infirmity of human nature, and among Most severe is the loss of an old friend. Aristotle was mistaken, and there's such a thing as a friend. Some 50 years ago, I began to have a friend. Over professions and pursuits were similar. For some 50 years, we have cherished a feeling of mutual affection and respect, and now that we have retired from the active exercise of our craft, we daily meet together and, like a brace of veteran grasshoppers, chirp over days bygone. I believe I never asked of my friend an unreasonable or unseemly thing. God knows he never did of me. Thus, we have obeyed Cicero's first law of friendship: Hac igitur primilex in iniquitia sanciatur, et nec rogemus res turpes, nec faciamus rogatia. We are most happily adapted to each other. I have always taken pleasure in regurgitating from the fourth stomach of the mind some tale or anecdote, and chewing over the cud of pleasant fancy. No man ever had a friend with a more willing ear or a shorter memory. But for this, which I have always accounted a providence, my stock would have been exhausted long ago after lying fallow. For 2 or 3 months, every tale is as good as new. God bless my friend, and compensate the shortness of his memory by giving him length of days and every good thing in this and a better world.